I describe my artistic practice as being, well, I work in lots of different art forms. I work with moving images alongside more traditional art forms like sculpture or painting as well sometimes. But I like to bring them together in interesting ways, and particularly like working with projected images and projecting into unusual spaces and creating films for live events. I think the art forms do flow into each other. I like working with digital media. I like working with film and video and animation and photography and using different images in different ways. But I always see that there's opportunities to bring other elements into it and bring making events by using film and video and getting people to come and see films in places that they wouldn't usually see a film, or getting people involved to help make a film to be screened in unusual ways. So I like to make art that does kind of cross different boundaries into different disciplines and use a mixture of media. So often the work is mixed media, and digital art and digital tools are a really great way of bringing different media together, whether that's sound and images or found objects, photographs. You can bring all sorts of different things together and also play with them over time, so they can start to change, and one thing can change into something else. I'm not really a trained animator. My background is in art, and I studied fine art, and where I always was kind of interested in photography and using video and projecting things, using slide projectors or lights as part of a piece or an installation. And I think I started working with moving image more with video when it was analog and you had to chop up stuff physically, or using VHS. But I've always liked animation. I always really enjoyed watching animation, whether it's cartoons or animated films. And so I think I just taught myself how to use the software that you need to know to make an animation. But it's also a natural extension of working with photography tools like Photoshop or something, that you can then translate that into something that's moving. So it's mainly self-taught, the software for animation, and I probably don't use it in a way that you would if you were taught it, or if you went to if you did an animation course. I'm not really a character animator, or I don't sort of set out to make narratives animations. They're just sort of images that move, or it's more to do with almost more like background animation, creating backgrounds, because I'm sort of into a rich visual image rather than making a character move naturally or something like that. What inspires me to create work is trying to kind of capture a particular atmosphere, or perhaps a way that you've seen something, or a strange way of seeing something that it's not easy to put into words. Whereas I find that using some of these techniques, animation techniques, you can kind of explain things that would be difficult to put into words. When I'm choosing the images that I use in the animations, often I'll use lots of different images that are from different sources, like from books, or also from online libraries of images. And I like to use lots of different styles and try and bring them together in new ways. You always have to try and find images that you're free to use. So I end up being drawn to copyright-free libraries of images. the look of those old types of images and the kind of associations and the qualities that they have. So often the types of images that you can use have an interesting qualities about them. When you bring an image in, it's you're working. It's like a material that you're working with, and it's almost like you're working with it as a raw material, like you would construct a sculpture out of wood or another material. You start to work with images as a material, so it doesn't. One image isn't any harder to work with than another in terms of the nature of that material. It's because it's just zeros and ones, so it's all just a sort of benign set of code that you can mess with. My starting point for creating this piece for The Haunting was to read the short story The Haunted Doll's House by M.R. James. So it was a really interesting story because it's very evocative, and it describes the doll's house that's found, and it goes into detail about the features and the turrets and the windows and the vaulted ceilings, and very descriptive about the doll's house that's found. So that was a starting point for thinking what could the doll's house look like that I make for the animation. I've enjoyed making the animated piece for The Haunting because the starting point was to think about a building, or to look at the story, which is a building or in miniature. And the story describes a kind of fantastical miniature building, and which meant I could sort of let my imagination free to make my own fantastical building, which I've made out of lots of different images of buildings, which range from classical buildings and some fancy architecture through to drawings of suburban semi-detached buildings, and some other buildings that I like, and elements from here and there, which I do like about buildings. Generally, they're a sort of assembly of different features and parts and styles. So I enjoyed researching that and finding different bits that I could bring together. So I constructed that as a still image, and then I found lots of images that I could put behind the windows. And there was a great resource from the British Library, which was a huge library of images that were free to use from books, which fitted in very nicely with the piece being inspired also by the Leeds Library, which we can use all these images freely. So I took the illustrations and put them behind the windows, and there are an odd mixture of images in themselves, but they're all ghostly images. So you peer through the windows in the building that I constructed, and you can see all sorts of ghostly pages from books and illustrations. And so once I'd created all those, then I can start to play around with it and bring movement into it, and lighting, and try to create a kind of ghostly feel to the piece. So I did enjoy doing that. It was fun, and it's a nice way of working. I recently made a big move. I moved from Yorkshire, where I was brought up, to a remote island off the west coast of Scotland. It's been a big move. It's been very interesting. There's a big change in life. I'm still able to do a lot of the work that I enjoy doing and creating art, and still working with people in Yorkshire. But we just fancied a change. My family fancied seeing if we could make a living, or have a good way of life in a remote place. We moved to Scotland. We do have family links to Scotland and to the Isle of Tiree, where we've moved to. But it's much easier for us to make a living doing art and the sort of work that we do up there, because the Scottish approach to art and education is more progressive and more open to the skills that we have. And so we saw that our skills were more in demand in Scotland than they are in England. And also, it's a very beautiful place, lots of open space and fantastic skies and scenery, which are nice to be around. It's a healthy place to be, and it's inspiring, a good place to make art and bring up children.